Morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink here with Ted Schilowitz. It's This Week in XR. Today is November 12th, 2021, the week of AWE and some other momentous announcements, which we'll get to in a minute. And then at the end of the show, we have Brian Vogelsang from Qualcomm. He's the head of Snapdragon Spaces. They had a big announcement at AWE, but first, Ted, you got to talk about Unity acquiring Peter Jackson's special effects company Weta for a whopping $1.6 billion with a capital B.
And you know, that number resonated with me because I believe that's right around the number that Google purchased YouTube for, aka 16-ish years ago, 1.5 billion dollars. So pretty interesting, and I think a very smart move on both companies. As we were mentioning before we started recording today, I have interesting history with Weta and Weta Digital and Weta Workshop because Peter Jackson adopted the Red cameras very early that I was involved in. So I spent a lot of time, multiple trips to New Zealand, spent a lot of time at Weta Digital, and then of course in my years at Fox, watched Weta Digital create apes that effectively looked like real animals, and your brain would watch these movies. And as we were watching even dailies,
I guess along the way they developed a lot of tools which they were thinking about commercializing themselves. But then when they saw the scale that Unity was operating at, they thought, well, this is crazy. We're never going to compete with Unity. And plus, of course, the amount of infrastructure you need to build to have commerce the way Unity does commerce is just really impossible starting from scratch. Unity and Unreal Engine have been developed over dozens of years, and hundreds and hundreds of iterations by engineering teams. So it's not something for the faint of heart. On the other hand, it should plug relatively seamlessly into the infrastructure that Unity has built. So it sounds like a win-win.
Well, and it's an interesting strategic move as well, because we all both know, a lot of people know Kim Libreri, who moved to Epic Games to essentially help jumpstart the cinematic part of their business, which is growing and quite robust now. And now the Unity guys said, well, if we can't get a guy like Kim, we'll just get a guy like Peter Jackson and Richard Taylor and all those guys that did the Weta side of things, which is between ILM and Weta, they're really the two major forces in the modern VFX industry that spawned lots of other companies. So it makes sense for Unity showing their power and their wherewithal, just like Epic, and it's the battle of the Titans continues.
The big get bigger.
Yeah.
So this was AWE week. I was there for 2.5 days. I spoke twice. I'm totally hoarse. It was so good to see everybody in the real world.
Yeah, you and I did a conference in the real world before that, the Infinity Fest. So we saw each other, and then I had some personal obligations of unfortunate family stuff. So I actually did a proof point to join AWE as much as I could via the Meta.
The Rooms platform. So what did you see remotely?
I saw our friend Hugo, and Brian, his colleague, is going to be our guest today, and I saw a number of the talks, mostly basically as I was traveling for some unfortunate personal stuff on my mobile phone. I was basically just had a earbud in, and people were talking to me. I was dealing with family stuff, and from time to time I would just be like, I just need 5 minutes, and I'd be watching some stuff, and it was fine. You know what? I got certainly it's not the same as being there with the personal connections and all the dinners and events and stuff, but it was a good proof point that you can join a conference remotely, and if you're willing to spend the time and go to the sessions and either sit on whatever device you've got, you can absorb the content, you can absorb the media, and that worked out fine for me, and there was no technical glitches and stuff. It was fine.
The conference said that there were 3,000 live attendees, which is a pretty good crowd, right? AWE in 2016, 2017 wasn't much bigger than that. Of course, we had 2018 and 2019, there were almost 10,000 people there. I thought that was a bit much. So for those of you listening who are not aware of Augmented World Expo, which is in its 12th year, it grew from basically a meetup into one of the most essential conferences in the XR industry, run by a guy who's a venture capitalist and an educator and an entrepreneur, Ori Inbar.
He was a guest on our show. There's an episode you could go back a few weeks ago.
And so, I mean, the downside of AWE is the big boys aren't there, right? Microsoft, they all have their own developer conferences. Microsoft, Facebook / Meta, Google, all those companies have their own, Microsoft.
I would argue that the upside of
have their
AWS,
own developer conferences, so they may have had one or two people walking around or on panels, but mostly AWE is everybody else. Now that's not,
I would argue that's
not nobody, right? I mean, there's huge companies that are there, like Qualcomm, that are essential to the industry, and Qualcomm, of course, very outward facing toward the rest of the world that isn't those giant companies. So because of their prominence in mobile. Anyway, Niantic, which is a very big and essential company that nobody knows about, made a huge announcement at the conference. They're introducing something called Lightship, which is a development platform for world scale AR. And that includes, they have a million points in the world where you can do precise geolocation from your desktop. So they've already built a substantial 3D model of the world. They built in computer vision, which not only can segment the world that it sees, but has a semantic understanding of it. So it can tell the difference between the water and the sky, even if the sky is reflected in the water, because it knows the sky is up, not down. Right. And it does occlusion. So if you're chasing a Pokemon around, it can hide behind a tree or run through your legs.
Right, and you just mentioned it, right? While not many people may know the name Niantic because they're a development company, almost everybody on planet Earth, with limited exceptions, knows Pokemon Go, which is their creation, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point about AWE, the big boys are not there, and I think that's actually a strength of AWE.
I do, because they suck the air out of the room.
It represents all the little guys, all the mid-sized guys, all the developers, and all the people that are building the ecosystem that is so important, and all those big companies, support.
Unlike CES, where the conference panels are sort of an afterthought, AWE, it's the panels that people are really going to. The show floor is great, and I saw some amazing things there, which I'll bring up in a second. But people do attend the conference, and it does spark a lot of conversation, both in person and on social media.
And you did 2 talks during AWE.
I did my landscape of remote collaboration platforms, and talked about those 50 companies that have emerged to meet this deep need we have to be together even when we're apart. Of course, there's going to be a vicious culling of that herd. I think they're in danger, all of them. Some more aware than others, that the big companies that they need as clients, not the little people, individual small teams, but big companies that are going to pay them hundreds or thousands of seat license fees, are building their own, because that's what Accenture and Deloitte are doing. And that's who they're going to turn to. They're not going to turn to, let me try these sites in the Oculus App Store. Interesting talk, very dynamic category because of that, and it's going to change quickly. My main stage talk was the metaverse talk, which was attended by a lot of people. There were probably 300 people in the room, which is pretty good, right? Because usually when I speak at a conference, there's like 75. There were probably 75 people at the remote collaboration, because it was a track talk.
Yeah, it's more specialized structure. Sure.
Main stage talk, and I love speaking on the main stage. And now that I've been a college professor and we've been doing this, I used to get on stage at AWE and there'd be hundreds of people there, and my mouth would get dry and my heart would go like this. But not anymore. It's just what I do. But it was great. People were leaning in. I mean, Ted, there is nothing like the real world. And when the CEO of Niantic, John Henke, was done with his presentation and he was ready to leave the stage, he said one thing which I have repeated multiple times: let's build a world we want to live in, not one we want to escape from.
Right, which is true. And on our side of the equation, while you were giving your talks, my good buddy and colleague Tim Adams from Nickelodeon filled in for me. We did a session with Eric from Disney, who's one of the sort of Imagineering genius guys at Disney, talking about their digital landscape. So I couldn't be there. So Tim filled in for me in the real world, and that's a session you can also watch on the captured stuff after the conference. They're going to post all the talks.
So a couple of
relevant.
other things happened to me. I don't want to run out of time for Brian, because I know that you have a hard stop this morning. So, you know, on the floor, I saw Tilt 5 finally, and I met in person the great Cherry Ellsworth, who is a, you know, legendary designer and entrepreneur. And for those of you who haven't heard of Tilt 5, they had a massive Kickstarter. They're venture funded. They've been working on a project I 5 or 6 years to make very low cost augmented reality glasses. They tethered to a PC right now. And with the special reflective game board, you have holographic tabletop games.
Right.
And this is incredibly hard to do. But basically the table disappears and you're looking at sort of like a deep, like you're looking into a crystal ball almost, you know, of these things happening inside of a 3-dimensional hologram looking thingy on the table. So I saw a couple of different games. It sounds like they've got a lot of developers engaged with them. I saw 3 different games, and you know, it's good. I think it's really good.
I've done it over the years and tested in various iterations of the product, and it's an interesting subset of something that I think is really valuable. The idea, you know, board games are really a big business, right? And the idea of sort of creating a technology layer with kind of the board game concept, you lay this sort of board thing down on the table, or a special kind of a cloth, and then these magical things sort of happen in your world, and it's very low cost, right? And that's the interesting advantage of that, is it's a good sort of starter into these more exotic MR devices, which will become more mainstay over the years. But this is a very good step into that for a lot of people. It'll be their first step into it.
And then, of course, I was at Vario's booth, and you know, incredible high resolution, lightweight headset, given the incredible power that it has.
Right.
Then you've got Eighth Wall, which is focused on WebXR, which is really booming, right? You don't need an app. You just need a camera on your phone.
Web, right.
And that is so important because of the amount of friction that is involved with getting people to download apps. I think we're just sick of apps. So you've got an activation. Nobody's going to download an app to see your activation. But if you make it easy, you know, everybody's sure. I mean, show me the holograms.
Right. Yeah, we know the fall off of, you know, just opening your camera and dropping right into something on a smartphone versus downloading an app, right? So you've kind of got this, and the fall off is dramatic when you ask people to download an app. So obviously a very smart strategy.
So Sandbox, not the crypto gaming company.
Not the other Sandbox, right?
Sandbox is a location-based entertainment company that does free roaming games for up to, I don't know, a dozen players. And it's a Hong Kong company. They have an American subsidiary that builds entertainment centers, and they just landed $37 million from Andreessen, which had invested in earlier rounds. Right. And is clearly a big believer. $37 million starts to be dreamscape scale money for location-based entertainment, which is you know, kind of a, you know, retail made out of atoms business that is incredibly difficult to scale, and throughput is incredibly limited. So you have to charge a lot per hour, which Sandbox really does. I mean, it's, you know, something like $60 per person per hour. If you talk to a mom who's had a kid's birthday party there, their eyes bugged out when they figured out that they just spent $400
right.
entertaining a bunch of kids for an hour. I think, well, who knows what a clown costs these days? Yeah. But good on Sandbox. I mean, I think it's exciting that LBE is coming back.
Absolutely. We have our Star Trek IP licensed to them, so they have a Star Trek experience that has been very popular. They have,
that's right.
Some competitive gaming stuff with samurai swords, and they have a horror experience, and it's a fun experience. They're in malls. We're working with a bunch of different vendors. This is essentially part of the strategy.
I mean, the Void failed. They took the Void to space in Las Vegas. So we shall see if they can make a go where many others have failed. But clearly Andreessen thinks they will. Yeah. So that's pretty important validation. Now I'm going to show you one thing, and then let's get to Brian.
Okay, sounds good.
Look what was waiting for me when I got home.
Oh, you got your Unreal glasses. Look at that. There they are. Pretty cool, Charlie.
All I need now is a 5G SIM card. Because they say it's compatible with not that many different phones, other than the Galaxy Notes, the new ones.
Right.
Instead, it's a hydrogen phone, which is decidedly Chinese. So we'll see if I can figure that out. But thank you to Nreal. Nreal's got a big announcement coming next week. It's under embargo, so I can't say anything other than it's big. It involves the United States. It involves a carrier, and I am excited as hell.
I think you pretty much just gave it all away right there, Charlie.
Not exactly, but anyway, it's a great company. I think as an independent, it's exciting to see that they have a chance.
A lot of time with them over the years. I got the devices here as well, and it's an interesting time that we're all involved in.
So let's get to our guest.
Okay, yeah, I think we're going to. Brian's an interesting guy. We're going to have an interesting talk.
Our guest today is Brian Vogelsang. He's the head of product for Qualcomm Snapdragon Spaces. We just got back from AWE. Brian, it was great to see you in the real.
It was really nice to get back with everybody and reconnect with the community in person.
Yeah, it's great. And of course, you had one of the biggest announcements at the show.
We did. We announced Snapdragon Spaces. So I think this was a little bit of a surprise for everyone. Snapdragon Spaces is a platform for developers to build AR experiences for head-worn AR glasses. So really excited about this launch and what it's going to mean for accelerating the pace of innovation in head-worn AR.
So. And it, of course, was paired with another announcement from Niantic about their Lighthouse technology, which I guess is also like yours, an SDK you would plug into a game engine like Unity or Unreal Engine, and you would automatically be set up to do world scale AR inside of your project, with computer vision that has semantic understanding, shared virtual objects. And mapping and segmentation and semantic understanding. So that's a heck of a lot of features. And when you pair that with making it easier for head-mounted displays, it sounds like it's a real gift to the creator community.
That's right. We're really excited about it. John in the keynote, referenced Qualcomm a couple of times, and in the Spaces announcement, there's a quote from John just talking about our collaboration and how we see the Lightship platform and Snapdragon Spaces working together. So really excited about these two platforms and what they bring to the developer community, and how we're going to really get the market moving in head-worn AR.
And Charlie, this is kind of an interesting week for me to talk to Brian in the public, in the podcast, because I wear both two hats today. I wear my co-host with Charlie hat, as well as I work for Viacom CBS, and we are one of those developers that is spending a lot of time with folks like Brian, Patrick Costello, Hugo Swart, the whole Qualcomm R&D team on this belief structure that is moving into practice about finding all the use cases around these forms of devices and how they connect to smartphones for this sort of next-gen entertainment platform. So I get to sort of play both sides of the equation. Brian and I are good friends. We spend a lot of time together. We spent a lot of time in San Diego together. So we can both sort of be a little bit inside track today, which is kind of fun for the listeners.
So which head-mounted displays are developers really asking for support on?
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of background on kind of why we did Snapdragon Spaces. So we believe that the smartphone is going to play a really critical role in helping accelerate head-worn AR. We think that the two working in tandem together, the glasses and the smartphone, is really important. And that starts with the glasses plugging into the smartphone via USB-C. We have Qualcomm's been working in this space back to 2018. We worked with Nreal, and we got the Nreal product launched in Japan and Korea and in Europe. And that was what we call a simple viewer. So the processing in that case is all done in the smartphone, and there's really not much happening up in the glasses. In 2019 at AWE, we introduced this concept of what we call a smart viewer. And the smart viewer, we put a processor into the glasses, and we do some of the processing, the latency sensitive processing, like the perception workloads, like tracking your position and location in a room, let's say, or in the future tracking your hands. We put that on the glasses, and then we do some of the processing still on the smartphone, things like graphics processing and some of the other more intense workloads. So this distribution of the workload is really important, we think, especially as we start to go from a wired glass to a wireless glass. Which is in the future. And at the show, one of the OEMs that announced with us with Spaces is Lenovo. And Lenovo have their A3 glasses, which follows this smart view architecture. It's got the Snapdragon XR1 in it, and then tethers to a Motorola smartphone. So we were doing demonstrations of that, and they're on board to launch Snapdragon Spaces with us. That'll be the dev platform when Snapdragon Spaces is generally available for developers in March. So right now we're in early access and working with a select number of companies. TED and CBS Viacom is one of those, and so really excited about that. And then we also announced something called our Pathfinders program at AWE, and this is like opening up the early access to a broader set of communities. So you can go to qualcomm.com/spaces and apply for that Pathfinder program, where there are resources available like hardware and co-marketing and PR and financial resources, that sort of thing, to get developers going between now and the spring. And then in the springtime, the platform will be generally available, hardware kits will be generally available, and everyone can dig in.
And I think a good way to sort of position this, give it sort of a metaphor for our listeners and viewers that they should very much understand, is when you look at the current crop of smartphones, right? These mobile devices that have essentially ruled most of people's lives these days, they're essentially two products, right? There's the back end, which is all the chips that sit inside the shell. And there's the front end, which is that screen, which is increased in its resolution, capabilities, its touchscreen finesse, and all the use cases, right? But you're still locked into this space that you have to hold in front of your face. What you're working on is kind of the next metaphor, where you still use all of those back-end chips and even some of the traditional screen, but then it links to this screen that you're going to wear that explodes that screen into this gigantic canvas that can be somewhat transparent and you can have objects in it, or it can be opaque and it can be a sort of a movie size or large television size screen, or something in the middle, right? So similar to how people use their watches today as kind of an additional screen surface that they wear on their wrist in addition to what they hold, this is an additional screen surface. And you kind of glossed over it, but I think it's really important to mention that there's a tethered part of this, right, where you literally physically connect the phone, and then there's a wire that connects to your head-mounted display that you can wear anywhere. But there's also a future where it's going to be wireless, so that the phone just sits in your pocket or in your purse or wherever, and light touch sort of use cases start to rule that use. And then over time, that wireless link gets faster and faster. You might want to mention how fast it already is today, where at some point you won't even need the wire, right? For almost everything.
Yeah, it's a really important point, Ted. So because we have the glasses connected to a smartphone, initially with a wire, really it's a multi-screen experience. So you have the real world where, we're providing through Snapdragon Spaces a spatial understanding of that world. So meshing the real world, understanding your position in it, which allow you to create more sophisticated and immersive augmented reality experiences. But because we're tethered to the smartphone, the apps are actually running on the smartphone. And so this means we announced the platform will support, game engine SDKs with Unity and Unreal Engine, and Epic were on stage with us at AWE. And so developers can use the existing workflow, the existing tools they're using, like the Unreal Editor or Mars in the case of Unity with AR Foundation, and they can develop with these familiar tools on the smartphone platform. And one of the things that I think is really unique about what we're doing with Spaces is that there's two ways to look at this. You can sort of say, I'm going to build an application from scratch for spatial computing, and it's going to be a full 3D application, living sort of in the real world. Or you can take a different approach and sort of flip it around and say, I'm going to add a little bit of augmented reality experience to an existing mobile app I have. And so what we think this is going to enable is the ability for the community sort of to wade into the pool, so to speak, like get in the shallow end, start working with augmented reality, in a head-worn environment comfortably and sort of learn and get their bearings and then be able to go like full in on 3D. And so this is, we're really excited about this approach because the smartphone is there. This provides us a unique advantage. And I think this also allows the developer community, if we sort of look at the developers as three different cohorts. You've got people who are developing head-worn XR today, like virtual reality or augmented reality. Then you've got another cohort who are building on smartphone AR, like you mentioned earlier, Ted, where they're building on AR Kit or AR Core today. And this is where you're looking at sort of the augmented world through a 5-inch rectilinear screen, and you're kind of the director of your own little AR movie, which is not very immersive, but they're still an important part of the developer community. We want to embrace them and bring them into head-worn AR. And then there's the third cohort is mobile developers. So we think this one's really interesting because they may not be doing anything in AR, but this is the largest community out there. And how can we sort of get them in the shallow end of this, get them working with it? An example that Steve Lucas on my team, he used in a presentation at AWE was like a cooking application. So let's say someone's building a recipe app and it lives on a smartphone. It's a smartphone mobile app today that people just use in their kitchen to cook with. And what if you could just start like shallow end by, not having your hands or being hands-free, but also not getting your hands dirty touching the screen. You just displayed, all right, this is the ingredients, and you display that in 2D, floating in the world above your kitchen. And then maybe you add a second screen, and that includes like a step-by-step instructions. And then maybe you provide a little interactivity where you can check, the recipes using your hands off or the steps off as you go. Or maybe then you have the ability to put a timer on and float those timers above each of your pots, let's say, that are cooking, or something that's in the oven that's baking, and those timers are all independent. So this is where someone who just has basic mobile app development skills can now take something like Snapdragon Spaces, put in their app, and just begin adding incrementally a little bit more AR with each release. And then before you know it, it will be a full, almost as if it was ground up developed in 3D. So we think this approach is unique, and it's going to bring more developers into AR than head-worn AR.
Well, what's important about that link to the smartphone is it provides you instant scale, right? So even though you're just on one of the two major platforms today, which is Android and likely iOS at some point in the future, you're already talking about billions of devices, right? Not just hundreds of thousands or millions of devices that have the ability to link to these things. And I know it's a small select group of phones today, right? But it's going to sort of grow in its capacity. But that allows developers to see an economic future to this, and not just let's try and develop something and hopefully in the years to come they'll make some money with it. They can actually develop something, see a platform that's real, live in that kind of gray zone is probably the wrong terminology, but let's use the gray zone of the magic window phone AR, and then the promise of this kind of heads up AR. You're at scale already, even with just the small subset of phones that you're supporting right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that we do the ability to tether the glasses to the phone does require a little bit of software embedded in the smartphone chip itself. We ship that with our chipset, so it's very easy for an OEM to turn on, and then the rest of the Spaces platform is downloadable. We really wanted to make the technology upgradable and mostly downloadable, so that we can evolve it really rapidly, and iterate with the developer community to add new, improve the capabilities. For example, the features, if you look at something like meshing the real world or doing occlusion, those are dependent on perception algorithms. Like you need a depth algorithm, and that's a machine learning based approach increasingly. And then you need a 3D reconstruction of that environment. So those depth and 3D reconstruction, machine learning algorithms need to be updated as we, can train them, make them better. That'll ultimately result in a more detailed mesh, which will allow developer to create more immersive and realistic experiences in the real world. So we want the ability to keep the platform up to date as those technologies evolve. And this is something we've built in, so that you can think of the thing in the phone as sort of a thin layer that handles that pipeline of being able to do the rendering on the glasses and do encoding, and then be able to stream that back to them and handle a little bit of that, communication for the perception. I talked about some of the head pose and that sort of thing gets calculated on the glasses and get transmitted back to the smartphone. So those lower level communications is what the software bits on the smartphone enable.
Do you want to mention a couple of the brands that you mentioned in the keynote and some of the other press, so that the developers that are listening to this can know, oh, these are the first phones, the first companies that are supporting it?
Yeah, so we had a whole bunch of partners that we announced in our announcement last week. So this week we had on the engine side both Unity and Epic was on stage with us. It was Rafaela Camara. She introduced Epic's support for the platform, and then also brought on stage Felix and Paul Studios. And they brought out a really amazing sort of a trailer they introduced around an application with the Jim Henson IP called Storyteller. And it's like an immersive storybook where you actually hold a physical book in your hands, and that book has markers and trackers on it that the Spaces platform can recognize. And this allows that book to sort of come alive in 3D and of course spill out of the pages.
Reality book.
Yeah,
the future, baby. What I was actually
imagine that.
What I was referring to, Hugo, is like the Oppos and the companies that are supporting your efforts in this world, so that the developers can know what phones they should be actually buying next.
That's right.
Things like the Google Pixel work yet? Is that sort of coming? Where would you sit with all those things?
Yeah, so we didn't announce specific phone models. The glasses we announced support for are the Lenovo A3. In our announcement, we also had Motorola and Oppo and Xiaomi. So those were had lend quotes and are supporting the platform. But we haven't gotten to the specific details of smartphones.
Yeah, so that's
we'll start to reveal that as we in the spring when we get to general availability. And early next year, you'll start to see more of a roadmap. The other thing we included in the announcement was collaborations with Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile USA, and NTT Docomo. So this is interesting because both Deutsche Telekom and T-Mobile, their sister companies, they have really aggressive innovation programs, the innovation centers, and they have engineers and business people focused on XR. And so we're going to collaborate with them to engage with the development community in their regions and run programs where we're helping developers get access to Spaces-based devices and the platform itself, and then build experiences based on it through both the T-Mobile Accelerator in North America and then the Hubraum Innovation Center in Deutsche Telekom in Germany. So that's fantastic. And then on the developer side, I mentioned Felix and Paul. We had a number of others that were in our announcement. Resolution Games was on stage with us. With Hugo at AWE, and they're really interesting because they have a real strong history in head-worn standalone virtual reality. So
they developed for the Magic Leap, brought Angry Birds.
They did. They're fantastic. Tommy and team. And what was interesting about them is, one, they announced an AR studio, so they're kind of committing to augmented reality in a more meaningful way. But the other thing that they mentioned and talked a little bit about is that they're, when they think about building for VR, something like the Quest, they're actually thinking about how that application could be brought over to head-worn augmented reality. Mm-hmm. And if you start with that, sort of premise in mind, that opens up, new possibilities as this head-worn AR market starts to accelerate. And we see more devices start to come in. You take a title they have a title called Demio that's really popular. It's a tabletop like dungeon crawler game, and it's multi-user. So you kind of think about, all right, that's perfect for augmented reality. It's everyone's sitting around a coffee table playing an immersive tabletop game, and in the future, there's a large community of there's an ecosystem in VR today, in standalone VR. So if you could bridge those communities between AR and VR, that could be really exciting. So we were really it was really fantastic to reveal this platform to ecosystem and get started.
And don't forget to mention that ecosystem in VR that you mentioned is largely powered by you guys, right? The Quest 2, which is the most popular head-worn, standalone VR device is a Qualcomm device underneath the covers, right? So
it is, yeah. We've been working in XR for over a decade, and really back in 2014 started thinking about how do we make virtual reality standalone, and you take the technology we have in mobile and bring that to a device that's completely untethered, doesn't require a PC, inside-out tracking, no lighthouses and other things. And so that culminated sort of in, we built reference designs, which are like these blueprints for OEMs to use to bring products to market more rapidly. And so we had a good success with that, introducing like 3 DOF based standalone devices initially, and then those became the 6 DOF devices that we see today, beginning with the devices like the the Vive Focus from HTC, and there was a Lenovo Mirage Solo, and then there was devices like the Quest 1 and now the Quest 2, and Pico's devices, of course, have been really helping evolve the industry. So we've been in this a long time, and we want to kind of do the same thing for AR, is get the market moving more quickly, and we think the phone plays a key role in that.
So last question, we're almost out of time, and that was great, Brian. I'm learning so much, but aren't we a little dependent on and gated by the slow rollout of 5G, which is why you see Nreal launching in places like Korea and Japan and Germany before the United States? Or, I mean, isn't that a lot of this technology, a lot of the, head-worn, tethered or untethered to a smartphone, dependent on that increase in bandwidth?
Yeah. So first off, I mean 5G is I wouldn't characterize it as being slowly rolled out. Its rollout is pretty pervasive, globally. But I think I think that there are elements of XR that can be reliant on 5G. One of the things that 5G affords is extreme low latency and high throughput. And so one of the things that Qualcomm has been doing with 5G is distributing that computing from, I talked about some of the processing in the glasses, some of the processing in the smartphone, but some of the processing can also happen in the mobile edge.
Right.
And so we've done a bunch of trials in virtual reality with operators with what we call kind of a split or remote rendering, where we move that graphics processing off of the smartphone or the glasses, the headset, and we move it to the mobile edge. And this requires us to take, let's say it's a virtual reality headset with eye tracking and controller tracking and head tracking, all those, every few milliseconds, take the pose of those the head and the hands and the eyes, and move those up. Yeah, we have to send those up to the edge, and then we have to do the graphics processing there, encode it, and then stream it back. And that whole motion to the photons hitting my eye, that loop has to be extreme low latency. So that's something that 5G, I think, is really enabling. We did that with VR, and we've been doing proof of concepts trials with virtual reality, and we're going to be bringing that to augmented reality as well. So we think it's that will allow you to visualize bigger point clouds, or visualize higher resolution meshes and 3D objects.
So the idea is to continue to sort of de-weight the glasses by allowing the processing to essentially move off board, right? Which I think is a hybrid approach with, like, there's something up in the cloud, which is valuable, but there's also just on-prem in your pocket, right? So
that's right.
You got a near-term and a far-term way to go.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of the balance of what do we do in the glasses, what do we do on the smartphone, and what do we do in the mobile edge. But 5G enables us to now kind of move these things off of the smartphone, because you've got, the challenge is, if you look at a virtual reality headset, it's about 5 watts, and you look at your high-end gaming PC and a GPU in there, it's running at 300 watts or something. So just the ability to there's no way to put that kind of capability into a device, or it's going to last just a few minutes. So this ability to access or tap into higher end processing capabilities at the edge, not maybe all the way to the cloud, but maybe within the operator's infrastructure, or distributed computing at the edge of that network, closer to the antennas. that makes this this latency loop really, really short, and we can now do much more interesting things. And I think that's gonna continue to evolve over the next couple of years. We're gonna see, more of this deployed. It's being deployed in sort of private networks today in enterprise, where like an LBE experience is one where if you can just get the backpacks off of people, but you still want to have that 300 watt GPU experience, you can use standalone. And this is one of the trials that we did in VR was around that. And so
yeah, Brian, that's what we're working on. It's great, Brian.
Brian, thank you for coming on the show.
For a long time.
Thank you for coming on the show and sharing all that great information about Spaces. I know there are many developers out there listening to this who are going to find that very, very valuable. So good luck with the project. Sorry we missed Hugo, but it was great to see you and him and Patrick and the whole gang at the show. So that's what we got this week. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Thanks for joining us.